Hi everyone, welcome back to Falcon's House. After watching the PS5 reveal, I have some thoughts about next-gen consoles and projectors. I want to talk about the big titles separately, so I am just going to show some of the middle of the presentation while I talk about this, because those games are mostly indie games that I wasn't too interested in. Anyway, we are in the middle of a gaming golden age. All three hardware manufacturers, Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft, have good consoles, and the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X are about to come out sometime this winter, which I feel really means like late October or early November. And they're going to push consoles to the closest they have been to PCs in a long time. They're adding ray tracing, they're going to be very powerful, they're equivalent to like a GTX 1070 today, which is a mid-range to high mid-range gaming PC if you bought brand new components, much less people that are using PCs that are slightly older than that. Like my personal rig is about 5 years old, running a 4790K and a GTX 970, and is something like a quarter of the power of these new consoles. I will be upgrading later this year to hopefully make video editing easier and to be able to play games on my ultra-wide 34 by 1440 resolution monitor. PCs are now also having real competition between AMD and Intel, and AMD and Nvidia on the GPU side, where we are seeing big gains with each hardware release, and they're going to push each other really hard. I think we're going to see some of the biggest generational leaps later this year when the new hardware comes out. Monitor technology has vastly improved with high refresh rate, high resolution, adaptive sync, and of course we're adding things like HDR and wide color gamut as well, but that's less common outside. It's common in TVs, less common on monitors, and we're slowly getting there. I could probably make a whole video about what was lost going from CRT and plasma to chase the price thing with LCDs, but I think we're getting back towards where that quality was. In addition to all this great new hardware, we have tools that make game development easier and lots of studios creating games more than ever before, so there's a lot more independent titles out there. However, projector technology moves a lot slower unless you spend really large amounts of money. I mean, I'm talking $15,000, $20,000 on a projector. Then yeah, you can get true 4K from Sony with all the latest HDR and everything you could possibly want. But all the mainstream projectors, even the mainstream, high-end mainstream, like what I have with an Epson 5040UB or a 5050, or even some of the other manufacturers that have 4K native with DLP, they still don't have all the features that normal televisions and monitors are starting to do. And they're not releasing any new models this year. Supposedly, Sony, JVC, and Epson have all stated that they are not releasing any new models in 2020. So 2021 or 2022 with the next gen will be the first time we probably see things like HDMI 2.1 and faster than 60 FPS at 4K or any higher resolution, or even finding ones that do 1080p 120 FPS is pretty rare today. And with the current generation of consoles, PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, games were primarily 4K 30, though they probably tried to push for 4K 60, but realistically ended up in like the 40 to 45 FPS range. Or they would do 1080p 60. So with 1080p 60, I feel like that is a much better experience than 4K 30. Up to about 90 FPS, or maybe even 120 FPS, I think there is an advantage to having more FPS over having a higher resolution. So once you get past that though, at 144 Hz or 240 Hz, you're probably better off at 120 and a higher resolution than a lower resolution and a better frame rate, unless you're playing some ultra competitive games. And at that point, you're probably playing on a computer monitor anyway. So the 5040UB, which is what I have and I've made all my videos about, obviously, only has a 10 gigabit per second HDMI chip, which limited it to 4K 30 with full color and with 10-bit color and 444 per pixel But the Xbox required the TV to support 4K 60 for native 4K support. So I've been playing all my games at upscaled 4K rather than at native, even though most games weren't actually hitting that frame rate of 4K 60. So, I mean, that's where the upscaling actually helps, because it's actually rendering a 1080p image and then making it 4K or 4K in my possession for this projector. So that's kind of the limit of where current consoles are. But with the next gen, we're going to see 60 FPS with 4K, probably. Some games might still be 4K 30 with additional ray traced features or other things like that. But we're also going to see 1080p 120 or at least 90. Like Microsoft just says high refresh rate. They haven't actually said what is supported, and potentially also 1440p and high refresh rates. So those screens are going to be better. Even the 5050 UB, which has an 18 gigabits per second chip and can handle 4K 60, is not going to be able to do 120 FPS or 90 FPS or anything like that. So while I plan on creating videos with next-gen consoles on the projector, I plan on making comparisons against 1440p high refresh rate and potentially 4K OLED. Though that is probably going to depend on my subscribers and channel growth improvements and rolling out Patreon to generate some money to fund channel improvements. And when I do roll that out, 100% of all that money will go back into the channel. I'm not going to be taking profit for myself to go do things that aren't going to benefit the channel. However, like I said, even the new 5050 UB has, with an 18 gigabit chip, it can do 4K 60, so potentially that could be fine enough for this, but in general I would probably recommend not doing that. If you are primarily using your screen for gaming, I would not recommend a projector at this time. Maybe a native 4K 60 projector, but those are all basically DLP, which has its own set of issues with fast-moving images, which would give you some ghosting or color or rainbow effect. So I wouldn't really recommend those for gaming anyway, and I would want to do something else. So, that being said, if you plan on watching movies and TV, the immersion on a large screen is worth it. If you have the space for 120 inches or more, if you're less than 120 inches, I would probably just say get the biggest other screen you can get. Ideally, projects like Samsung's Wall TV can actually make it to market for consumers at reasonable prices, and we can just combine 4 4K TVs into one giant bezel-less 8K image that's 140 inches or something. That would be instant replacement for me to the projector. So I would recommend buying an LG OLED if you want to game at 4K 60 or higher, because they support 120 FPS with adaptive sync from both AMD and NVIDIA with G-Sync on the brand new C10 with the firmware update. If you want to game at 1440p high refresh rate, which I think we're probably going to see 90 FPS on next-gen consoles at 1440p, I would recommend getting a gaming monitor, even if you're a console gamer and not going to game on PC. And I'll be testing and using an Eve Spectrum when they are released later this year, which is a 240 hertz 1440p HDR 600 monitor, which will have all sorts of bells and whistles. It supports HDMI 2.1 and can maximize all that frequency and everything else. That's a 40 gigabit per second. HDMI 4.1 is 40 gigabits per second. It's more than double the speed of what an Epson 5050 UB has. So if you are primarily going to watch TV and movies, a projector is fine if you have the space. And I still would recommend a projector. I still love the large screen and having it fill your vision. And I will do videos on next-gen consoles on the projector. But I'll be doing direct comparisons against my monitor and be like, it looks better here, this is better there. And there might be specific games that are better on one versus the other, and I'll be able to test all that. And I hope to get a 4K OLED to be able to test on that as well. So that's how I kind of feel about next gen. It's going to force projectors to become faster or whatever if they want to stay in the game. And maybe they don't care. Maybe they're just saying we're going to focus on movies and TV. We don't care about gamers, but there's plenty of people I know that watch my channel that care about doing both, and they're the ones that are going to have to make choices about what they want to buy or buying both, like what I'm probably going to end up doing. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. And remember, when I reach 100 subscribers, I will start my contest for a gift card, and I only need 10 more, so I'm almost there.